Voss Velvet Club was louder than any night in the past year. The capos sat at the center table, the way they always did when they wanted to be seen watching. Representatives from the Ward family held the booth nearest the stage. Port investors, financial brokers, and a handful of neutral VIPs filled the rest of the room. Gold light hung low over the bar. A small jazz trio worked through something slow near the back wall. Tonight was not a party. Tonight, Adrian Voss was going to announce his fiancée. If the night went the way it was supposed to, Celina Ward would walk into the Voss network as its future mistress. Not just a wife, but a name the old capos would learn to trust. Mira Lane stood at the VIP entrance, adjusting the guest list in her hands. Celina's name had been printed in gold ink at the top of the page, the way names were printed for guests who mattered. When Celina walked in, the room went quiet for a moment. Black gown, silk gloves, a vintage necklace that had probably belonged to someone's grandmother, a polite smile that never touched her eyes. Celina looked Mira up and down, slow enough that it couldn't be mistaken for anything but intentional. She smiled. How charming. Adrian lets anyone greet his honored guests now. A few people nearby laughed quietly. Not loudly enough to be rude, just loudly enough for Mira to hear it. Mira said nothing. She pulled out the chair. She ordered the correct bottle without being asked twice. She kept her voice even, the way she had learned to keep it even through years of being looked at like furniture. When she leaned down to pour Adrian's wine, she caught the perfume. White, rose, amber, a faint cold note underneath, something almost metallic. That same scent had been here the night before. Not similar, the same. Mira had spent enough years in this job to know the difference between a scent that resembled something and a scent that was the exact same blend, worn by the exact same skin, layered the exact same way. She lowered her voice just enough for Adrian to hear and no one else. She was here last night. Adrian turned. What did you say? Mira did not look at Celina. She watched the wine fill the glass, steady, unhurried. Your fiancée was here last night, and she did not come to celebrate. Adrian did not react in front of the room. He simply gestured for Mira to step back, a small motion of his hand that told her this conversation was not finished, only paused. Tonight was too important. If he made a scene over a hostess's whisper, the old capos would see weakness. The Ward family would have an excuse to walk away from the alliance they'd spent months building toward this exact evening. Rafe would say he let a low-level employee stain, something that should have stayed clean. He could not act on a feeling, but Mira didn't look like someone performing for attention. She wasn't watching him for a reaction, the way people did when they wanted to be noticed. She returned to her work as if she'd simply stated a fact that needed checking, nothing more. Celina sat beside Adrian, flawless to the point of discomfort. She said the right things, laughed at the right moments, remembered every capo's name correctly, even the ones who rarely left their estates anymore. She knew exactly how to make a room full of powerful men feel like they had chosen the right woman for their boss. Rafe Bell stood behind Adrian's chair the way he always did. He looked at Mira a beat too long. When Mira changed the bottle, Celina said lightly, "Hostesses here are bold." Rafe answered, "A good one remembers orders. A bad one remembers fantasies." Mira didn't argue, but Adrian heard it. A few minutes later, he called Mira into the side hallway. Away from the music and the watching tables, his voice was low. If you're trying to ruin tonight out of jealousy or imagination, I will have you removed from this club before the main course reaches the table." Mira looked at him. "No flinch, no pleading. I don't need your attention, Mr. Voss. I need you to check the room she entered when she thought no one would remember." That stopped him for a beat. Not because he believed her. Liars usually ask to be believed. They want the reassurance of it, want to see it land. Mira was only asking him to check, which was a different kind of request entirely. He studied her face. She didn't look away. She had spent years being looked through by men far less dangerous than Adrian Voss, and she had learned that the moment you drop your eyes, the other person decides what your silence means. She wasn't going to let him decide that tonight. "You understand what you're accusing her of," he said. "I haven't accused her of anything yet," Mira said. "I told you where she was. What you do with that is yours to decide." He let the silence sit for a moment. "Tell me what you know. All of it." Mira didn't dump everything at once. She had learned, over years of this work, that people only believe what they can verify in pieces. She started with the softest details. The night before, after midnight, a woman had entered the club under the name Celina Ward. Dark cloak, thin veil, long gloves that covered her wrists. Mira didn't claim to have seen her full face. She stated exactly the limit of what she knew. "I'm not saying I saw her whole face. I'm saying I remember everything a hostess has to remember, so she never serves the wrong guest the wrong thing." Adrian asked, "What do you remember?" The woman had ordered the 2001 Bordeaux without looking at the menu. No question about price. Most guests asked even when they didn't care about the answer. She chose a table away from the stage lights, but close to the VIP hallway. Wine dark lipstick, the kind that leaves a mark even after the glass is empty. White rose and amber left behind on the chair when she stood. Adrian didn't react outwardly, but he knew the 2001 Bordeaux wasn't on the general menu. It was only poured for VIP guests who'd been there before, or guests guided in by someone already inside the club's inner circle. "That bottle isn't listed anywhere a stranger could find it," he said. "No," Mira agreed. "Which means whoever brought her knew exactly what she liked." She moved to the second layer. The woman hadn't entered the restricted area alone. Rafe Bell had met her at the side door. He'd used a temporary black VIP card, the kind reserved for guests who needed access without leaving a permanent paper trail. He'd ordered no secondary service log. He'd told the floor staff the negotiation room would only be open for a few minutes. Adrian's voice went cold. "Rafe?" Mira nodded. "Yes." No added emotion. No, I think. Only what she'd seen. "I think your fiancé expected no one to notice that a hostess remembers perfume better than politics." Adrian began to understand why this story was dangerous in a way that went beyond embarrassment. If Mira was wrong, she was insulting his fiancé in front of the family that mattered most tonight, and the consequences would land on her, not on Celina. If she was right, Rafe, the man who had saved Adrian's life once, the man Adrian trusted with the parts of the business he trusted to no one else, had walked Celina into the locked center of the Voss organization. He had reason to trust Rafe. Years ago, an ambush nearly killed him, and it was Rafe's information that got him out alive. That kind of debt didn't disappear because a hostess whispered a sentence over a wine glass. Rafe had been more than an advisor since that night. He had been the one steady thing in a world built on shifting alliances. The one man Adrian had never had to second guess, or so he had believed. It was the kind of trust that made betrayal nearly impossible to see coming. Because the mind refused to look for it in the one place it had already decided was safe. "You're asking me to believe my own advisor sold me out," Adrian said. "I'm not asking you to believe anything," Mira said. "I'm asking you to check what she thought no one would remember." Adrian turned away from her and looked back toward the main floor, where Celina was laughing softly at something one of the ward representatives had said. From here, she looked exactly like the woman he'd agreed to marry, composed, gracious. Built for rooms like this one, he thought about the negotiation coming in 2 days, the meeting with the 3 port representatives that would decide how much leverage the Voss family carried into the next decade. He thought about the council restructuring he'd already begun planning, the one that would quietly reduce how much control Rafe held over security logs and VIP access once it was finalized. If Mira was right, someone already knew about that restructuring. Someone had a reason to want information before it became official. He didn't say any of that to Mira. He simply nodded once and told her to keep talking. The club the night before had been quieter, low light over the bar, the last guests trickling out toward the front doors. The trio had already packed up their instruments. Mira had been reconciling the guest list when Rafe appeared at the side door. Rafe rarely greeted guests himself. He had people for that. That alone had stuck in her memory, the kind of detail that doesn't matter until suddenly it does. The woman beside him kept her head low, but the way she walked through the door wasn't the walk of someone afraid of being seen. It was the walk of someone used to having doors opened for her. She didn't ask directions, didn't look for signage, didn't wait to be invited toward the booth. When she pulled off her glove to take a glass, Mira saw a thin ring with an aristocratic cut, the kind that wasn't bought, only inherited. Tonight, Celina was wearing the same ring. There had been something else too. A folder, slim and dark, tucked under the woman's arm when she arrived, and gone by the time she left. Mira hadn't thought much of it at the time. People carried folders into this club for 100 ordinary reasons. It was only tonight, watching Rafe's face when she mentioned the Mira feed, that she understood the folder might not have been ordinary at all. Rafe had told the staff, no service interruption, no secondary log. Mira remembered that line because it broke procedure. Every guest entering the VIP zone had a secondary log, no exceptions, not for the boss's guests, not for family, not for anyone. It was the one rule that never bent. That night, the name Celina Ward had been entered into the main guest list, briefly, the way every guest had to be entered before being allowed past the hallway. By the next morning, it was gone. Mira still had the handwritten reconciliation from the end of her shift, tucked into a drawer behind the bar, a place where she kept things she wasn't sure mattered yet. She didn't yet know it was evidence. She only knew someone in this club had tried to make last night look like it had never happened, and a good hostess remembers who gets erased, because erasure is its own kind of confession. Adrian had a preliminary check run on the system logs that night, quietly, without telling anyone but the 2 technicians he trusted most. Rafe noticed almost immediately. He always noticed. He didn't panic. Panic wasn't in his nature. He did something more dangerous instead. He made Mira look suspicious. He told Adrian in a tone that sounded almost concerned, "A club girl who remembers this much about your fiancé is either ambitious or obsessed. Neither is something you want standing near your negotiation table." Celina didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. That wasn't how she operated. She simply stood beside Mira at the bar and smiled, the kind of smile that looked warm from across the room and felt like a blade up close. "It must be exhausting," Celina said. "Remembering strangers so desperately," Mira answered. "Only the ones who pretend not to be themselves." The air between them went tight enough that the bartender, 2 stations down, stopped polishing glasses to listen. Rafe suggested removing Mira from her shift entirely. He called it the safest way to protect the engagement announcement. If she was lying, the scandal would end quietly, contained to a single dismissed employee. If she was right, Adrian could check it later, after the night was already a success. Mira understood the trap immediately. If she was pulled from the floor, she'd lose access to the bar terminal. She'd lose the mirror feed, the backup log, the handwritten ledger sitting in the drawer with her name nowhere near it. She looked at Adrian, not at Rafe, not at Celina. "If I'm lying, fire me after you check the bar mirror feed." Adrian frowned. The hallway camera was blocked. Mira said, "I didn't say hallway camera. I said mirror feed." That was the first time Rafe lost his composure. Only for a moment. A flicker so brief most of the room would have missed it. But Adrian had spent years learning to read men exactly like Rafe, and he caught it. "There's no mirror feed," Rafe said. "That's a service camera. It doesn't record anything useful." "It records bottles," Mira said. "And bottles sit on a shelf in front of a mirror. And that mirror faces the hallway you blocked." The room went very still. Mira explained what the camera actually was. Behind the bar there was a low camera, never meant for VIP security. It existed to track inventory, prevent theft among staff, reconcile service logs against what guests had actually ordered. But because there was a decorative mirror mounted behind the bar, purely for atmosphere, something the designers had added years ago, the camera sometimes caught a faint reflection of the VIP hallway beyond it. Not clear enough for proper surveillance. Not clean enough to show off in a presentation. Enough to know who walked in with whom, if you knew exactly where to look and exactly when. Rafe had blocked the hallway camera, the obvious one, the one anyone would think to check. But he hadn't thought to worry about the camera meant for watching bottles. He had never imagined the truth could live inside something built to observe a wine shelf. Something so beneath his attention that he hadn't even considered it a threat. At that moment, a security guard acting under Rafe's earlier instruction moved toward the bar to pull Mira off her station. Adrian stayed silent, watching, his jaw tight. Celina looked around the room with a calm smile that didn't waver. She knew everyone was waiting for the announcement. The capos were starting to glance at their watches. The ward representatives were exchanging looks. If Adrian announced now, then checked the facts afterward, there would be no clean way back from it. The engagement would already be public, already real in the eyes of everyone who mattered. Mira said the line that needed to land, the one she'd been holding since the hallway. If you announce before you check, then you're not choosing trust. You're choosing embarrassment over truth. That hit Adrian directly, harder than anything Rafe or Celina had said all night. He wasn't only afraid of losing the alliance. He was afraid of being proven, in front of the entire club, to have nearly let himself be controlled, to have stood at the center of his own organization and almost handed it away because saying no felt harder than saying yes. But that fear was exactly what Rafe had been using to control him all along. He waved the guard off. "Don't touch her," he said. "Not yet." The music slowed. VIP guests went quiet, sensing something shifting even if they couldn't name it. Celina stood beside Adrian. Rafe stood half a step behind him, the position he always took, close enough to advise, far enough to deny involvement. The old capos watched the center table, waiting. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. If Adrian raised his glass, Celina would become the future of the Voss family, permanently, publicly, in front of witnesses who would remember this exact second for years. If he stopped, the whole club would see him doubt his own alliance, his own choice, in front of the same witnesses. Adrian looked at the wine in Celina's hand, the 2001 Bordeaux. He asked, very quietly, almost gently, "Funny, I didn't know you liked this vintage." Celina answered too fast. "I discovered it recently. A perfectly ordinary line. The kind that should have meant nothing." But Adrian had never introduced her to that wine. He was certain of it. He remembered every bottle he'd ever shared with her, because there hadn't been many. Rafe said nothing. His silence came half a second, too late, the kind of pause a man makes when he's deciding whether to correct a mistake or let it stand. That half second was enough. Adrian set the glass down on the table, carefully, the way a man sets something down when he's no longer sure he wants to be holding it. He looked at Rafe. "Bring me the mirror feed." Rafe said, "Adrian, not here. Not in front of everyone." Adrian answered, "Especially here." The small screens mounted around the club, the ones usually used for ambient visuals or sports broadcasts on quiet nights, flickered and lit up. Guests expected a welcome video for the engagement, something curated and warm. Instead, Mira stood beside the terminal behind the bar, her hands steady on the keys. She pulled up last night's mirror feed, the footage she'd flagged and saved the moment she'd realized what she was looking at. At first, the footage looked ordinary. The bar, the lighting, bottles on the shelf, neatly arranged. A faint reflection in the mirror behind it, slightly warped by the curve of the glass. Then Rafe's shadow appeared in the frame, crossing toward the hallway. Beside him, a woman in a dark cloak. She lifted her veil to take a glass, just for a moment, just long enough. The mirror didn't show everything, but it showed enough. The line of her jaw, the particular sweep of her hairstyle, the ring catching the light, the wine-dark lipstick, the small object she took from Rafe's hand and slipped into her glove. Then the two of them walked into the VIP hallway together, and the frame went dark as they passed beyond the mirror's reach. Mira pulled up the backup log on the second monitor. The timestamps matched exactly, down to the minute. She opened the handwritten Hostess ledger and turned it toward the room, holding it up so the nearest capos could see the page themselves. The line was still there, in her own handwriting from the night before. Celina Ward, escorted by RB. One of the older capos leaned forward to read it himself, then sat back, without a word, the kind of silence that carried more weight in that room than any accusation could have. Celina tried to hold her composure, but her hand tightened around the stem of her glass. She said she only wanted to understand Adrian's world before the wedding. She said Rafe was only showing her the room, nothing more. A private tour meant as a gesture of trust between two people who were about to be family. Mira asked, if that were true, why was the guest name deleted before noon? No one answered. Adrian ordered the negotiation room checked immediately. 2 of his men left the floor without being told twice. While they were gone, Adrian turned to Rafe. 2 days ago, you had the decorative frame in that room replaced. You told me the old one was distorting the acoustic shielding. Rafe's voice was carefully even. It was a maintenance issue, nothing more. Convenient timing, Adrian said. His men returned with the frame in hand, the screws already removed. Behind it, a listening device, small, professionally installed, wired into a cavity that hadn't existed in the original frame. Rafe said immediately, anyone could have placed that. Anyone with access to that room. But Mira had the final layer ready, the one she'd been saving. The device has a serial number, she said. It matches a batch of audio dampeners imported into this club 2 weeks ago. The paperwork lists the reason as acoustic shielding repair. The order was placed by Rafe Bell. She let that sit for a moment before continuing. The relay carrying its signal runs into a secondary office. Your office, Rafe. And the door override log for the negotiation room shows it was opened using your access code, not Celina's, not anyone else's. Yours. One of Adrian's men confirmed it on the spot, reading the override timestamp aloud from a handheld terminal. The room he'd entered to retrieve it had a second monitor still logged into Rafe's credentials, left open from earlier in the week, as if he'd never expected anyone to think to check. This was no longer a rumor, no longer a hostess's word against a fiancée's composure. It was a system, laid out piece by piece, each part confirming the next. Celina looked at Adrian, her voice sharper now, the polish finally cracking. You're taking the word of a club girl over mine. The Ward name needs this marriage, she said, quieter now, almost to herself. You think I wanted to stand in a hallway at midnight wearing a stranger's name? I did what I had to do to make sure I wasn't walking into this marriage with nothing of my own. It was the closest thing to an honest sentence she'd said all night, and it didn't help her. Adrian answered without hesitation. No, I'm taking the evidence of a woman who was doing her job over the lies of people who thought her job made her invisible. The club went completely silent. Even the trio at the back had stopped pretending to tune their instruments. Rafe was restrained by 2 of Adrian's men before he could reach the side exit. Celina's engagement ring was taken from her hand in front of the very people who had come to congratulate her, who were now watching with a different kind of attention entirely. Adrian looked at her one last time. You didn't come here to know me. You came here to listen before I spoke. The engagement ended at the exact place it was supposed to be announced, in front of the exact people it was supposed to impress. After the guests had mostly left, filing out in clusters of hushed conversation, Voss Velvet Club went quiet in the way large rooms go quiet after something enormous has happened inside them. Adrian stood at the bar. On the counter sat the crystal glass Celina had used, the lipstick still faintly visible on the rim. Nearby sat Mira's handwritten ledger, closed now, ordinary again. One item built for nobility, one item built for a hostess. Tonight, the second one had saved the entire Voss family. Mira was getting ready to end her shift, gathering her things from behind the bar the way she did every other night. She didn't ask for thanks. didn't ask for a position, didn't try to turn the moment into something it wasn't yet. Adrian called her back. I almost chose convenience over truth. Mira said, most powerful men do. That's why women in rooms like this learn to remember for themselves. Adrian looked at her differently for the first time that night. Not as a hostess. Not as the woman Celina had mocked at the door 3 hours earlier. But as the only person in the room who had seen betrayal while it was still wearing something beautiful, and had said so anyway, knowing exactly what it could cost her. He asked, why did you keep speaking, knowing what it could cost you? Mira said, because if I said nothing, the people who use women like decoration would have won twice. Adrian was quiet for a moment, turning that over. Then he issued new rules for the club that night, calling the senior staff together before they could leave. No one could erase a guest record without the head hostess's sign-off in writing with a reason attached. Every VIP area had to keep an independent secondary log outside any advisor's control, checked weekly by someone outside the chain of command that could be interrupted. No employee would be punished for raising a warning backed by evidence, regardless of their position or how inconvenient the timing. Any change to acoustic framing, decor, camera blind spots, or VIP hardware required independent inspection before installation, not after. No fiancé, advisor, or allied guest would enter the private negotiation room without the boss's direct confirmation, given in person, not relayed through anyone else. Then Adrian said to Mira, you were the only honest welcome I had in this building tonight. Mira didn't laugh. She simply said, then next time, listen sooner. This wasn't love at first sight. It was something more dangerous in Adrian's world, something rarer and harder to fake. Respect. By dawn, Adrian Voss had learned that the woman everyone called invisible had been the only one watching clearly, the only one in the room sober enough to see what was actually happening underneath the silk and the wine and the practiced smiles. The capos, who had stayed long enough to see the truth unfold, didn't speak of it as scandal. They spoke of it quietly among themselves. As the night Adrian Voss proved he could be trusted to see what was in front of him, even when the structure of the room told him to look away. That mattered more to the alliance than any wedding ever could have. Mira didn't return the next night, expecting anything to be different. She set the tables. She checked the guest list. She poured the wine for whoever sat down in front of her the way she always had. But when Adrian walked through the door, he didn't sit at the center table. He sat at the bar, across from her station, and asked for nothing more than a conversation. And the Voss family learned a rule every empire should fear. A woman paid to pour wine may still be the only person in the room sober enough to remember the truth.